Hello and welcome to Freelancing for Journalists.
I'm Lily Cantor.
And I'm Emma Wilkinson.
And welcome back to the final series of the year. We've mixed things up a bit for this series and we are focusing on specialisms. So we're speaking to a range of different freelance journalists all about their particular niches. But as always, we're going to start the week with our win of the week. So Emma, over to you. What's yours this week?
Well, I think finally I've been feeling a bit unproductive this week. And actually, when I add up all the things that I've done, I don't think I have been unproductive at all. But I just feel like I haven't finished a big piece of work. But I've just done this morning an 1,000-word article, and I'm on the way to finishing another 750-word article. So I think I'm going to end the week feeling a bit more satisfied than I had earlier. So it's not much, is it, actually just doing my job, but I feel like that is a bit of a win because I've just been feeling a bit all over the place this week. What about you, Lily?
Yeah, I think it ebbs and flows, doesn't it? Like some weeks you can be super productive and you can be smashing out loads of articles, and then other weeks you might only do one. So I think it's all part and parcel of it. I think mine for me is I did probably the laziest pitch last week, where I literally sent an editor 5 headlines. And I said, if you want to know any more information about each of these ideas, let me know. And he came back and commissioned 3 of them. And I literally had just given a headline and that was it. So that was a big win. I was like, this is the perfect way to pitch. Just send a headline.
Yeah, this is really getting pitching down to its bare bones, isn't it? I'm assuming this is an editor that you already knew and had worked with before.
I do know. I haven't written anything for him before, but I've written for sister publications. Right, okay. So he knows what I can do and their styles are very similar. So I think he knows I get them. So that's why, it made it very quick and easy to do.
Yeah, I can definitely see a newsletter coming on.
It's going in these the newsletter.
Pitches. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, fantastic. Right, it's time to introduce our guest. Today we have with us arts and culture journalist Precious Adesina. Her work has appeared in a long list of places, including BBC Culture, New York Times, Financial Times, The Cut, ID, The Economist, The Independent, and more. Precious also has given a number of talks on writing about the arts and currently hosts a monthly radio show.
Hi, Precious.
Hi, how are you?
Good. So lovely to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great. And where we'd like to start is, as we do with our guests, is to find out a bit more about your work and your specialism in particular. So can you tell us kind of how you ended up writing about arts and culture?
I think that has always been one of my main interests from when I was a child. So I grew up in Shoreditch, so very central London. Used to go to a lot of arts and culture things that my parents would take me to. And because it was Shoreditch, it was also in Hackney, so not all of it was the big places. Sometimes it was like small art events or even, something at the library. So that's kind of always been my interest. And then I used to do an after school club growing up on journalism. So I think it was a natural route for me. It wasn't an intentional one. I think it was not until my end of university when I was like, what am I going to do with my life? And everyone was like, what was all this journalism stuff for? And then I realized that actually that kind of made sense. I thought initially I would go into something more political, but I realized I liked using arts and culture as like a conduit to talk about political topics or socio-political topics in a way that felt more accessible and less overt.
Fantastic. And I think you and I are quite similar, even though we're writing about completely different fields. Because am I right in thinking that you did an art history degree first? Because I did a science degree and then did a journalism MA and went into kind of writing about health and medicine. Do you think it helped you to have that kind of specialist education in sort of art history topics to be a sort of writer in this field? You know, to what extent did that help you along the way, do you think?
Yeah, it was definitely helpful. So I studied art, history of art and material studies, which the small bit on the side is like art conservation, which I don't use that at all anymore, actually. um, I think I don't think it's needed. I think as long as you have an interest in it, um, it, and can grow that interest, it kind of is fine for anyone to kind of build a knowledge in art history. But I definitely think it's helped in that I think I have all the background, not all the, but a lot of background context on things, and I can notice influences of artists quite a lot, or I can more quickly draw and stuff. But actually, I think the biggest thing has just been learning as I go along. So with each article I write about art, I learn something more. And it kind of grows from there, really.
Yeah, it's that sort of organic process.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit more about how you actually got into freelancing, because I believe you had staff jobs previously. So kind of how did
Yes.
freelancing come about?
So this is my second time going freelancing. The first time I went freelance was much earlier in my career. Um, just like after my master's, I had done an internship at the Financial Times on the arts and culture desk, and then also an internship at Time magazine. And that time was a bit more by accident in that there was a gap before the next thing. And I decided that I actually liked what I was doing, and the process. Obviously, then not many people knew who I was. It was a lot harder, but I felt like the reason why I just felt like people took a lot of interest in my writing and my work, and also taking a chance on me. So the freelancing quite grew into something that I was really proud of. But because when I first started, I didn't really know about freelancing. I had applied to everything and anything. And it was when people saw what I was doing with my freelancing that and Telegraph got in touch saying, "Oh, I think a while ago you showed interest in us. Would you be interested in coming in to chat about this role that we have that you've shown interest in a very long time ago?" It was like very long. I was very confused. I had to actually go through my emails to see if I'd actually shown interest in that role. And yeah, and I came in and they were like, yeah, just I think it was a case of that they had a role that they didn't fill for a very long time. And they went back and they remembered me from when I was doing my master's as well. And I had applied for their graduate scheme. And they were like, okay, this would be a good person. Because I got to like the final stage of their grad scheme. Yes, and then I was there for a long time. I would say it was maybe like 2.5 years, but most of that was during the pandemic. So I couldn't say how long I would have actually been there if it wasn't the pandemic, because I did realize that I like freelancing was more what I was interested in. I think I'm very self-motivated, and I kind of like working with different people. And the people that I work with when I'm freelancing are people that I genuinely enjoy working with, and the range of articles are quite big as a result. So yeah, I had noticed that. So once the pandemic was over, I just returned really. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we hear that quite often from other freelancers, that it's about the variety and the kind of control and doing different things that just, yeah, that's why they've kind of opted to do that. I mean, obviously you had that stint as a very early journalist then came back to it. Are the things that you'd learned that, so that second time round, you approach things differently, or you just had more kind of understanding or knowledge of how it worked? How did that evolve over time?
Yeah, for sure. I think I was coming back with a lot more confidence the second time round. The first time round, I did not know anything about freelancing, in that I had written a piece once while I was doing my master's that did really well, and people started asking me if I was interested in writing other stuff. And I was, oh yeah, I could do this. And then I realized there was way more of an art to being a freelancer. It's not just you write an article here and there. Like it's actually you need multiple things going on to sustain yourself, and um you need to be quite ideas driven. So I'd learned a lot of these things, but I'd also, having started so early, I'd like grown with people. So when I was returning to freelancing, it was just a case of talking to the people I had spoken to before and working with them again. And through doing those articles, I actually started working with other people too. So it felt like a very natural process. But I also read books as well on how to be a freelancer. And someone I followed from the very start of my career is Anna Codrea-Rado. And actually, she was very helpful because I remember when I started freelancing, I went to an event that she was holding. It was around Christmas time on, it was like an event for people who didn't work in an office. And I went and I literally, every advice she ever gave back then, I would hold it dear to my heart. I remember one idea she told me was pitch to fail. And I still do that today. And it has really transformed my career in that I don't just pitch to people that I know will say yes. If there's a dream publication and I want to work with them, I will send them an idea, even if I think they're definitely going to say no, because it surprises you who will actually say yes in the end. So I think stuff like that really helped. So when I was coming back to freelancing, I read her book on how to be a freelancer, called You're the Business, which was very helpful actually. And because it made me realize I needed to be a bit more business minded in the way in which I approached my journalism as a freelancer, which has been really helpful because sometimes I really want to do a story and the amount of time it will take, the pay, everything just doesn't make sense. And it's made it a lot easier to say no, which I find really difficult to do.
Yeah, it is really hard being able to say no and being able to take that step back and balance up, the
Yeah.
time and the effort against the pay. No matter how kind of passionately you feel about a story, it's really important to be able to do that. And I suppose one thing you've been able to do as well is to work with quite diverse publications.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, if you 1 minute you're pitching to Vice and then to the FT, like, do you take a different approach for sort of different publications?
Well, it's a bit, not really, but that is not necessarily in the way in which I pitch. As in, like, the way in which I pitch is the same, and it actually changes on how well I know them. What is different is the story itself. So I usually have a story idea and then think about the publication that would like that idea and then pitch it to them. And that has been, I found the best way to do it. Because I feel like the more I write about arts and culture, the more I'm like, oh my gosh, I think The Economist would really like that. And then I send it to them. And obviously they don't always say yes. That's just part of the job. But I feel like I have been told I have a knack for kind of getting what a publication like is looking for, kind of. I don't know if everyone would agree with that. So I'm sure one of my editors is like, are you sure about that, Precious?
Yeah, I mean, with that in mind, I guess, do you read quite widely as well to kind of get that sense of what people are after, what their audiences are like, what other kind of articles that they're doing in the section that you're interested in?
I do, but not with a goal in mind. I think because I think my job is very much centered around my interests. So I think it's very much natural. And I think that's where I think I'm lucky in that, I don't have to seek out, oh, I need to like look at this or look at that to do my job because it's something I'm naturally doing anyway. So I actually do want to know what exhibitions are on. I do want to see the latest TV show. I do want to see a film. I want to read about social politics. So it's usually just a natural, oh, I heard about this, what does this mean? And then a story idea might come from that. But also my interests, because it's my interest, it's something I'm doing anyway. So I might go to see something with my friend or talk to my friend about something and the idea comes from that. So I think it's a bittersweet thing in that my life is very much intertwined with my work. And I know a lot of people say that's not a good thing, but I think it's been good for me because it is actually something I'm really passionate about. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I get that because I write a lot about running, and if I'm not writing about running, I am running, and if I'm
yeah,
not running, I'm coaching other people to run. So it's kind of this
yeah,
constant loop that I'm like living in. But if that's where your passions lie, then isn't it great that you can, intertwine that with your work. So I guess that's,
Yeah.
that's the great thing about being freelance. But I mean, as you mentioned there, you also kind of, I guess, write a bit more broadly about social political issues. So do you think it's kind of important that you're not kind of too niche in a way, and that you are able to kind of spread your wings a little bit?
Yeah, so I do social political issues and lifestyle as well. And actually I didn't um intentionally write so much about art, even though it's my interest. And because I think that's what I write about most. It's just naturally what people wanted from me. Because a lot of the art stuff I write, while some of them are my ideas, a lot of them is something someone else has asked me to write, or they've asked me for ideas related to art. So that's kind of how it happened. I think I do enjoy having like broad ideas, and I do sometimes speak to editors and be like, oh, actually, I also like this, and this, that isn't arts and culture, if you're interested in that. Um, I think being pigeonholed has its positives and its negatives. I think I might not have as much work if people didn't know me as an arts and culture writer and someone who writes a lot about art. So I think that's the positive, and it's something that I particularly enjoy. And I think it's happened that way because it's maybe what I'm best at. But then you don't want it to become monotonous, which obviously if it becomes too monotonous, you lose that drive, which you don't want to do. So I think it's nice to have some variety and to push yourself as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I found that as a specialist that people will come to you because you get known for writing about a thing, but you don't want to
Yeah.
limit yourself too much. One thing that I wanted to ask you about is sort of, I may be coming at this from someone with a science background, but arts and culture can sometimes be seen as very sort of highbrow or inaccessible. Is that something that you try to address in your writing to kind of make it more relevant, or maybe seek out more diverse topics that aren't always going to get sort of covered?
Yeah, so I actually think that is maybe my niche, in that the way in which I write about arts and culture, I think anyway, is accessible. And I think that was really important to me, especially as someone who grew up in Shoreditch, where, I didn't grow up in an environment where loads of people knew about arts and culture, actually. When I told my mum I wanted to study history of art, she was like, wow, you just decided just like that, you're gonna throw your life away. She didn't quite say it like that. She was quite supportive, but she was very, very confused, because it was not like a natural sort of thing for me and my family. And but through that, it made me learn about the how inaccessible history of art is, or arts and culture, and like strive to write in a way and address topics and exhibitions in a way that reaches a broader group of people, um, who may not be so knowledgeable, or may be interested in artwork but don't understand how it relates to anything. And I kind of try and move the story along so the artwork will relate to the world that we live in, so it becomes much broader and less just about the artwork itself.
And
Yeah.
does that also extend to the talks that you give about arts writing? Is that really about kind of encouraging more people to get involved, and kind of, and
Yeah.
lifting the lid on that? I mean, what would your advice be then to sort of new journalists looking to get into this field?
Yeah, so most of the art talks I do on like writing about arts and culture, it's usually to a younger audience, which has been weird because I started doing them when I felt like I was still, well, I am still young, but like I felt like I wasn't far off them. But I just feel like it's important to have a diverse group of voices, and for people not to be afraid of journalism. I think people are afraid of the journalism because it's such a cutthroat industry. And I think my advice has kind of changed over the years. But if I was to give one single advice, I think it would be to back yourself, really. I think it's an industry where it's very easy to take someone's opinion so personally, and because it is a cutthroat industry at the end of the day, and people kind of do, sometimes you get advice and it feels hurtful. And it's kind of having that drive to understand that, okay, this person is giving me advice, what should I take for that, but not taking it as you're terrible, and that it's like having room to grow and still understanding yourself, and that you're gonna get better, if that's the best way to do it. And also, in the same vein as that, and what I said before, in being not being afraid of failing, I think that's important. And reaching out to people, I think that is maybe one of the things that I realize now that I was good at, in asking people for advice, sending emails. And I've always been that way. I think even from a young age, I was quite proactive, and it was not an intentional thing. It was just, I'm a very enthusiastic person, so I always want to learn more. So I'd message people like, hey, I was thinking about this. Can I come in and see this? Or can I speak to you about this? And I realized later on that that is probably what worked in my favor, because then people start rooting for you, and you don't even realize that you've started that because you've been messaged them every day for a very long time. So yeah.
Yeah, and you never know where those connections are going to lead either. Like you said
Yeah.
with getting the Telegraph job, that was something that you'd not even remembered showing an
Yeah.
interest in a position there. So things can come back to you. And when you said about pitch to fail as well, I was thinking I've actually had work where the pitch has not gone anywhere, but they've got back in touch with me with something else just because
Yeah.
like
That
they know
happens a
my
lot.
name then. Yeah, yeah. You mentioned before about how freelance is so kind of ideas driven. So could you talk to us a bit more about sort of where you get your ideas from, or maybe how you develop ideas, if it's just a case of, oh, this exhibition's on, but kind of how do you then take that to something unique?
Yeah, so it's changed over the years, because now I think it comes more naturally to me, especially as in arts and culture, the more you grow as a journalist, the more people also send you ideas. And so you can there's less work that you have to do to find those ideas. But I started off maybe being more proactive with what I was reading, as you mentioned before. But also I used to like put alerts for phrases that I was particularly interested in. So it might be like a Google alert for like activism and art, or feminism and art, or TV and this. And sometimes article ideas would come from that, but it was also just listening to people and what they were saying, and doing your own research. So one of the ideas I was proudest of in the past, when I was a bit newer to journalism, was an idea about the alternative music scene in Nigeria. And it was because I'd gone to see my friend, and her cousin was here from Nigeria, and she was playing some tunes. And I was like, oh, I've never heard of this. And she was like, you don't know about the Ote scene? And I was like, I don't think the Ote scene is something popular here. And I Googled it, and it was so popular in Nigeria and parts of Africa, but nobody had covered it here. And now, and I wrote one of the first articles outside of the country, and it literally was just from hearing someone mention it. So I was, very excited about that. Obviously today the alternative music scene in Nigeria is more popular. Still not as popular as other versions of Nigerian music, but it is like these artists are really well known now. So it's it's also about timing as well, like catching things at the right time. And like, why is this relevant right now? I think yeah. I think a lot of my ideas also now come from kind of what's popular, but like taking aspects of it, as I've mentioned, and like turning it on its head. So, okay, there's a film that's come out, but there's an aspect in the film that's really interesting that I've seen in something else too. Like that maybe there's a trend here. Maybe we should look into that trend. And then I'll message an editor like, I've noticed this trend. What do you think? And then they'll be like, oh no, I think you're wrong. Or they might be like, yeah, you're right. And then it goes from there.
Yeah.
So I think that's more how my ideas come about now, just through observation. And yeah.
Yeah. And it's being immersed, isn't it, in
Yeah.
all those things that you're interested in, so you can see those trends and join the
Yeah.
dots in those ways. If you're not consuming media, you're not going to have that in the first
Yeah.
place. I mean, similarly, I've had ideas. Like I've been watching a documentary about someone and I'm like, how come I've never heard about this person? And like,
Yeah.
just because there's a documentary on a streaming platform doesn't mean there isn't an audience outside of that. So you could, then follow it, into a print story. So yeah, I think, that is a really good way of getting ideas. And one thing that we haven't really touched on yet is your radio show. So can you tell us a bit more about that? What's that covering?
Yeah, so my radio show is for a local radio station around London Fields called Little Radio. And the main thing I do for it is speak to musicians and DJs about one thing they're passionate about outside of their career. So it's called One Thing. And part of that is I also play music. I don't interview people for every single show, but most of them there's an interview. Because part of it is also, when I play the music, if I've interviewed someone, the music will be related to the interviewee. But if it's no one, it might just be like a vibe, like oh, I went on a nature walk. Here's some ambient music. Or I'm feeling, in the party mood. I might play some house music or some techno or something. So it's like adjacent to journalism, but I would say it's more like for fun. And it's just very similar to what I do for my job. But I've never gone to it as in like this is work. I go to it because I enjoy it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice to have that kind of freedom and flexibility, isn't it, to do those kind
Yeah.
of different projects that we're interested in, or think, outside in other interests that we have that kind of might connect to our work, but you don't have to go to an employer and say, is it okay if I do this? You can just kind of go with the flow. Which probably brings us quite nicely to my next question, which is, I wonder what the most positive thing about freelancing is for you. And I suppose to keep it balanced, we should also say what's the most frustrating thing about freelancing.
Yeah, so the positive is, I guess, like the freedom, as I've mentioned before. And I imagine a lot of journalists will identify with that. I don't think I'm a person for office politics at all. I find it really difficult actually to be involved in office politics. And I think that's a big part of being in the office, like, having to, everything needs to be run by your manager, or there's conflicts in the office and between maybe two senior people and you're kind of involved even if you're not, or the lack of flexibility. I don't know, I just feel like in the office there's a lot more, everything goes through someone, or and it's just more strict. And when you work for yourself, you don't really have to, obviously you have your editors and there's people involved, but it's just not the same. I don't know if I'm articulating that very well. But yes, the positive is the freedom, and working with different people. And then the downside,
Doesn't
I'm
have
not
to
too
be a
sure.
downside.
Yeah, well, there definitely are. Obviously, the most obvious one maybe is late invoices, which everyone who's freelance goes through at some point. I think, and of course, not everyone can afford a late invoice. That can be very detrimental, and I'm always really surprised when that happens. That it's still happening, and there's no rhyme or reason to who will give you a late payment. It could be anybody really. Doesn't matter how big or small the publication is. So that's one. And I guess I still feel like within freelancing, like Black journalists still are struggling in terms of the recognition, getting the recognition they deserve, getting the stories, being paid appropriately for things, awards. There's like a lot of things that I think a lot of Black journalists still aren't receiving or getting recognized for, which means there are just fewer freelance Black journalists, but I guess there are also fewer Black journalists as a whole. So that's one thing that I think is a real downside, and yeah, I find it quite disappointing, because I think there are some amazing Black writers that deserve to be recognized more than they are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think diversity in the industry is something that just comes up again and again and again. you know, like you say, with Black writers and also with class as well, and just kind of, do you just have to be kind of rich and middle class to enter the industry these days? It's just, you kind of just see it over and over, and then the downside of that is the stories don't get told. Like, you just have the same kind of voices over and over again, and that's just boring. So you would think that there would be an impetus there, but it never seems to properly change. I would say that my kind of frustration and positives there were just the same as yours. Hated office politics when I was in an office. It can just get so toxic, and everyone just like gets into a spiral of really low morale, and you just think, I just want to get on and do my
That's the main
job.
thing. I just want to get the work done. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't, what is all this other things that are going on?
Yeah, when you enjoy the work, just do the work and then go and do something else
Yeah.
and enjoy the rest of your life. Yeah, flexibility, definitely. Thank you so much, Precious. It's been really fascinating to talk to you. Before we sign off, we really want to get your recommendation of a piece of work by a freelance journalist. Have you got something in mind that you'd like to share?
Yes, it's a column by Charlie Brinkhurst Cuff. She's my friend, but I was a fan of her before she was my friend, funnily enough. It is quite weird that like I was a fan of her work and now we're friends, but I think it's an industry thing, maybe. It's a small industry. And her column at the moment, she started one recently on friendship. And I think actually that's been a very inspiring column. I think she's quite honest in it. It's for Stylist magazine. And I think a lot of people maybe don't give the topic of friendship the attention that it deserves. Like, you know, if you break up with a friend, it's not seen as serious as maybe, you know, breaking up with a long-term partner, but actually the effects can sometimes be even more detrimental in terms of that can be a big hole in your life. So I really do appreciate that column. I've enjoyed it quite a lot.
Fantastic. Right, well, we'll dig that out and we'll add it to our show notes, so our listeners can go away and have a look at that.
Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much. So we're going to bring it to a close for this episode now. Just to let our listeners know, if you want bonus podcast episodes, you can become a premium newsletter subscriber, where you'll also get access to an extra weekly newsletter. And all of our other resources are on our website, freelancingforjournalists.com.
Yes, and we also want to say thanks to our producer, Maddie. And bye for now.
Goodbye.